it is critical that the world understand the terrible threat that the Daesh and its allied forces pose to the states of Western and Central Asia. Terrorist movements whose goal is to destabilize every state in the region are looking for new bases of operation. We are the front line.
Afghani President Ashraf Ghani addressing a joint session of Congress calling Daesh, another word for ISIS, a terrible threat to his region of the world.
This as the U.S. has now joined in airstrikes to take back the city of Tikrit. The goal there from the administration has been to ultimately degrade and destroy ISIS, yet very little has been accomplished, some would say, in this almost year-long effort.
Now, one man says that the strategy to defeat ISIS might force us to take a look back at post-World War I Russia. For more on the story, let's bring in that gentleman. He is Jack Goldstone, professor of public policy at George Mason University. He joins us from Newsmax, Washington, where our good friend Bob Walker, my former congressional colleague, is likewise standing by. So, Jack, I guess it was Mark Twain who said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. What about post-World War I Russia gives us a lesson in how to defeat ISIS?
Well, it surely rhymes in this case. I think the lesson is don't underestimate what looks like a small radical group. Once they start taking over territory and once they build a strong ideological movement, they become a threat to the world for decades. I'm talking about the Bolsheviks, the early communists. When they took over Russia at the end of World War I, America actually was part of an allied movement that tried to push the Bolsheviks back. But we didn't follow up with a lot of dedication, and the Allied movement kind of slowly fell apart. And the Bolsheviks were left in charge of a critical central territory, and we know what happened. World War II, the Cold War, we had to deal with the Bolshevik problem for decades and decades, as the whole world did. I don't want to see that repeated.
But isn't part of our problem is that we're unwilling at this point to even name who we think our adversaries are? And it's very hard to put together a strategy if you can't even name who it is you're fighting.
Well, that's absolutely right. And again, this reminds me of what happened at the end of World War I. We had a lot of countries, each with their own agenda, that all signed up to say, sure, we're willing to fight against the Bolsheviks, but we'll only do it kind of on our terms and in our way. And there were a few quick victories. The Bolsheviks regrouped and they waited for the alliance to fall apart. And that's the real threat now. We're not really taking ISIS seriously. We think that airstrikes will do the job, or that we can rely on Iran to take care of problems for us. And it's just not true. We really need to pull together a broad coalition. The Saudis, Turkey, even Iran, they all have to kind of work together and say, if we don't eliminate ISIS now, it's going to roil the world and the region for such a long time. It's going to be a real disaster. So let's stop this disaster.
You kind of touched on that coalition. You've written about this, saying a collaboration is necessary. It's imperative to defeat ISIS. How broad does that coalition need to be? Because ISIS has popped up all over the world, basically.
About a minute to answer, Jack. Got a minute
right
here.
The longer we wait, the bigger the coalition needs to be. Right now, we need Turkey to push from its border. We need Iran to support an Iraqi government that is not just a Shia movement, but that is a national Iraqi movement. And we need the Saudis to be supportive. The Saudis have already said they'd send troops into Yemen. I'd like to see them also send troops to fight ISIS.
So truly a big part of the coalition would be pan-Arab in nature. And Jack, what you're providing here in terms of a coalition is a tall order. But as you mentioned, the threat that could await us all if it follows that parallel of the Bolsheviks, which of course started running Russia after that revolution and resulted in the communists taking over what became the Soviet Union, it becomes problematic. Tell you what, I want you to stay put, and we'll keep Bob Walker there as well. And when we come back, we'll talk about another region of difficulty, specifically Yemen.
When it comes to the counterterrorism fight against AQAP, we still have resources in the region that are able to take the fight to AQAP. So we have not suspended our counterterrorism operations just because of the political instability or because we've had to pull people out.
Marie Harf, the State Department deputy spokeswoman on CNN there, saying that our counterterrorism efforts will not end despite the current situation in Yemen.
Yeah, Harf's comments come as Yemen's president, Abdul Rabu Mansour Hadi, has gone into hiding and Saudi Arabia has launched airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels.
So as this continues to move toward war, is there anything that can be done to bring the Yemeni government back? Well, let's continue our conversation with Jack Goldstone, the professor at public policy at George Mason University, and also my former congressional colleague, Bob Walker. Both gentlemen join us again from Newsmax, Washington. Jack, your assessment of Yemen, is it just full-on conflict now?
Yes. This is frankly scary. And it's the same pattern. With ISIS, the United States said, we just need counterterrorism. These are just a bunch of terrorists. And a few months later, they took the city of Mosul. With the Houthi rebels, it was, we don't need to worry about these rebels. Our target is al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We'll focus on them. And a few months later, the Houthis take over Sana'a. So we're not watching the ball. Our so-called counterterrorism efforts, our efforts to be surgical and precise, are just too little and often too late. Now I think we're looking at an all-out regional war for control of Yemen.
So, Jack, what do you think we need to do to restabilize Yemen? Or can we? Is it too late?
Look, it's probably too late. The government has fallen. The country is divided between Sunni groups and Shiite groups that are fighting for control. This is a large territory in population. It's 24 million people, about the same number as all of Iraq. It's not a small matter to stabilize this. And so I think what we're going to see is a drawn-out war with a Sunni-supported coalition on one side, an Iran-supported coalition on the other. And this is a war where the United States is going to lose no matter what, because it's going to increase sectarian conflict in the region, put oil supplies at risk. And this is just something that, at best, we have to hope can be contained by the people fighting locally. Our day to influence this, I think, has passed.
This is really a scary situation because, just a few months ago, the administration was proclaiming this a success, and then you hear the State Department come forward and still talk about it as a success because we're going to continue our terrorism operations. That just isn't possible to do given the state of the conflict on the ground in Yemen right now.
That's right. We've lost
is this administration totally out of touch?
I think this administration is driven by a deep reluctance to commit ground troops and by an inability to get our coalition partners to act together. What's really frightening is that ISIS has been better at reaching out and building coalition partners in Libya, in Nigeria, even to individuals in Europe. They're outflanking us in building a coalition at this point. We can't let that go on. So I think the best we can hope for at this point is to coordinate with the Saudis and other Sunni forces that are trying to restore the government, hope that they succeed, but recognize that this is going to be a long fight. In the meantime,
Jack, I'm sorry, just with the 30 seconds remaining, with the Saudis involved, are they going to do more than provide air power? Do you think you'll see Saudi ground troops eventually against Iranian ground troops in Yemen?
This morning, a Saudi advisor said that Saudi Arabia could put over 100,000 troops on the ground in Yemen to prevent the establishment of a Shiite state on Saudi Arabia's border. That's the last word I've heard.
Sounds like they're pretty serious. We'll keep an eye on what Iran's response is. Jack Goldstone, we appreciate what you had to say. It's very sobering information, both from a historical perspective and, quite frankly, in the here and now. Sir, we thank you very much. This has been such a busy news day.
Yes, it has. With Yemen and airplanes and Bergdahl. It's been a busy news morning.
And we're going to pause for just a second, catch our breath, come back with more here on America's Forum right after this timeout.